Hi everybody, it's Miss Smith and I'm back for another day of Frindle. I am sure that my little doggies will be making an appearance. They were very excited to hear that we were going to be reading again. They are super interested in finding out what happens to Nick. We left off at chapter 14. And it's entitled Inside Nick, and I gave you guys the first little sentence at the end of the last time I read aloud, so I'm going to start right where we left off. On the outside, Nick was still Nick, but inside, it was different. Oh, sure, he still had a lot of great ideas, but now they scared him a little. For instance, Nick learned in social studies class that people who buy stuff are called consumers. If consumers stop buying, stores and shops and restaurants, well, they go out of business. And then boom, a new idea hit him. All the kids loved lunchtime, but the awful part about lunch was the eating part. Ooh, school food, ew. And the food was never a surprise. You had to smell it all morning and then go and eat it. The food was always bad. Ooh, well, thought Nick, the school cafeteria is sort of a restaurant, isn't it? And the students are the consumers, right? And we don't really have to buy our lunches there, do we? Nick could see it all. He would get all the kids to bring their lunches from home every day until the ladies who made the lunches cooked better food. He was sure these women didn't cook food like that for their families. The kids were the consumers with $1.35 in their pockets every day. And until the food was better, that's where the money would stay. Great idea! Nick was sure it would work, and he got all excited about it. But then Nick remembered what had happened with Frindle, and he stopped cold. He was sure that all the kids stopped buying lunches. Sooner or later, if they did, someone would figure out that it was all Nick Allen's idea. He would get in trouble. People would write about it in the newspaper. The principal would have to call his parents. Anything could happen. So for the first time in his life, Nick kept a good idea to himself. He never even told John or Chris. And that is what changed Nick. His mom was the first to notice. "Are things okay at school, honey?" she asked one day in early March. He seemed kind of down and a little sad, and it kind of worried her. Sure, Mom," said Nick. "Everything's fine." "Everything's okay with your friends? They haven't been hanging around very much." "Mom, honest, really, everything's fine. I'm just busy with hockey and basketball, that's all." And Nick went to his room and shut the door. Well, Mrs. Granger noticed the change too. The clever little rascal who had looked her in the eyes and said, "But I really didn't have a Frindle with me." That boy didn't seem to be in her class anymore. Now a quieter, more careful Nicholas Allen came into class every day. He did all his work perfectly, didn't speak unless she called on him, and didn't laugh and joke with his friends like he used to. School would be over in a few months, and it seemed like there was nothing she could do to help him. Toward the end of the year, Nick remembered the letter that Mrs. Granger had asked him to sign on the back when this Frindle business had just gotten started. The chess game was over, so he was expecting to get that letter from Mrs. Granger any day. But all spring it didn't come, so he thought she must have forgotten about it. So I just want to remind you about this letter. So let me just go back. And from chapter 8, this is what happened. So she says, when he says, "I don't know what you're talking about. This is a Frindle. I'm just calling it a Frindle because that's what it's called about." Mrs. Granger said to him, "Very well then, I thought it would end up this way." Mrs. Granger pulled a fat white envelope from her desk drawer and held it up. "This is a letter I have written to you, Nicholas." Nick held out his hand, thinking she was going to give it back to him, but she didn't give it to him. "I'm not going to send it to you until all this is over. I want you to sign your name on the back with today's date across the back of the envelope. When you read it, whenever that may be, you will know it is the same letter and that I have not made any changes to it." "This is weird," Nick said to himself, but to Mrs. Granger he said, "Sure," and he signed his name in the best cursive and put the date under it. Then Mrs. Granger stood up abruptly and said, "Then that is all for today, Nicholas, and may the best word win." There was a frown on her face, but her eyes were very different. They looked almost happy. And Nick was halfway down the hall before it hit him. She likes this word war, and she wants to win real bad. So now it sounds like Nick is starting to think about this letter, like, oh, I won the word war, so where's this letter? All right, here we go. So on the last day of school, Nick knocked on Mrs. Granger's classroom door. She was straightening up the textbooks on the bookcases below the windows. Without turning around, she sang out, "Come in!" Nick said, "Hi, Mrs. Granger?" Mrs. Granger stood up and turned to face. "Oh, it's you, Nicholas. I'm so glad you stopped by. I've been meaning to talk to you, and this will save me having to send you a letter this summer." Nick gulped and said, that's what I came for. I came for the letter. Mrs. Granger looked puzzled for half a second and then said, "Oh, right, the letter." Then she paused. "Well, you'll recall, Nicholas, that I said I would send you that letter when all of this word war was over. And as far as I'm concerned, Nicholas, it's not over." "It's not?" Nick tilted his head to one side and asked, "When will it be over?" Mrs. Granger smiled and said, "Oh, believe me, Nicholas, you'll know when it's over. I wanted to talk to you about something else." She walked across the room and stood about 2 feet from Nick. Nick had grown during the year, and their eyes were almost on the same level. Nick noticed that the eyes of Mrs. Granger was softer, but just as powerful. "I've noticed that you've been very quiet for the past few months. You know, Nicholas, you didn't do anything wrong this year. I know a lot of things happened and a lot of things were said, and you must have had some difficult days here and there, but your idea was a good idea, and I have been very proud of the way you've behaved most of the time." Nick was embarrassed, but Mrs. Granger just kept on talking. "And Nicholas, you've had great things to do in your life. I'm absolutely sure you do, and you mustn't let a few hard days trick you into clamming up." And then Mrs. Granger reached out and shook Nick's hand and looked him in the face. Her eyes were turned up brighter than Nick had ever seen them before, and she said, "Nicholas Allen, I've enjoyed having you as a student. Now you go out there and have a wonderful summer, and I expect to hear remarkable things about you, young man." Mrs. Granger watched Nick start to leave, but before he got to the door, he turned and said, "Thanks, Mrs. Granger. You have a great summer too." And then he grinned and said, "And don't forget to buy some Frindles for next year." Thanks to his little talk with Mrs. Granger, along with a healthy dose of summer vacation, Nick made a full recovery. He was proud that he had made up a new word, and he enjoyed thinking about all the commotion it had stirred up. That one little word had made 5th grade a year to remember. Before he started 6th grade, Nick was Nick again, and all through junior high and high school and college, he proved it. For example, 2 years later, all the school cafeterias in town were serving delicious food at least 4 days a week, all because of Nick and the consumer. And the state superintendent of schools had made a special trip to Westfield to learn why this little town had the most successful school lunch program in the state. And in high school, well, the stories about Nick's other adventures could go on and on and on. But that would delay the end of this story, the one that started when Nick was in 5th grade. Because the end of this story came later. It came 10 years later. And what was happening to Nick's word during those 10 years? Nothing fancy, nothing exciting. Words don't work that way. Words either get used or they don't. And Frindle was being used more and more. It was becoming a real word. We are going to stop there because we have chapter 15 and I will be reading tomorrow. And the title of that chapter is "And the Winner Is." So I'm excited about that. So you might remember this from the last time I read. I think it was called a ladle. I'm not really sure, but I'm calling it a shimmy bomb. So my shimmy bomb is what I ladle chili with and soup. So I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the things you guys might have renamed at your house. Uh-oh, there's somebody at the door. Come here, Pepper. Come here. Let's see what's happening? By the way, Pepper says hello for the day. And come here. Oh, that's Peanut. And here's Pepper. This is Pepper. We love you. We love reading to you. And we will be back tomorrow. Okay, everybody, take care. I miss you.